Tonight we want to talk about India's defence upgrade. Like I said, it's a controversial subject because defence needs are strategic, but defence deals are political. Governments can fall over corruption charges, so policy paralysis tends to set in. Plus, we've entered an election year in India. In less than 12 months from now, India will hold a general election. Despite all of this, we're seeing a concerted push on defence acquisitions. After years of stagnancy, Indian forces are getting the upgrades they need. Last month, India and the US finalized a deal for American military drones. And this week, Prime Minister Modi is traveling to France. The focus once again is on defense deals. Two major deals could be finalized. The first one is for the Rafale fighter aircraft. India has already bought 36 Rafales. The Indian Air Force uses them now. And the plan is to buy 26 more. But these are different fighters. These jets will be used for the Indian Navy. India is buying what is called the Rafale M. Now, this is a fundamentally different jet. It operates from the sea. The current fleet of Rafales that we have is designed to operate from land runways. What the Navy needs is a plane that can fly from aircraft carriers. So the Rafale M will cater to that need. And the M here stands for Marine. This jet has a stronger body, folding wings, and a reinforced landing gear. It has equipments to support maritime operations like radar systems, which can track targets in the sea. Targets like ships and submarines. The plane also has better navigation systems designed for operations on the high seas. And how is the deal structured? Reports say India wants to buy two versions of the Rafale M. 22 planes will be single-seater and 4 will be double-seater trainer aircraft. Some reports also talk about a joint venture, planned to produce engines for fighter jets together. We'll have to wait for the specifics to come out. But that's the first deal. The second one is for Scorpene submarines. India wants to buy 3 of them. The Indian Navy knows these submarines well. It already has 6 of them. They were built under the Project 75 program. This is a 16-year-old project, an effort to build Scorpene-class submarines indigenously, to build them here. Early this year, France offered to get involved. It will transfer technology. It's willing to transfer technology. So the submarines can be built in India, and this will be an important agreement. The Indian Navy has set ambitious goals for this. By 2030, it wants to arm itself with 24 submarines, 18 conventional subs, and 6 powered by a nuclear reactor. How many has India managed to procure so far? Just 6 conventional submarines. India doesn't have a nuclear-powered submarine yet. It is still in the process of building one, so a deal with France will help in meeting the 2030 target. Which brings us to the cost. How much will these two deals cost India? One estimate says around $11 billion, but negotiations are still on. So the number could change. Whatever the final figure, this engagement is important. The culmination of an effort that began back in 2015. That's when India signed the first Rafale deal. It was a major step in defense modernization. Before 2015, many of the planned acquisitions were delayed, either because of bureaucracy or the lack of political will. Like I said, corruption has been a feature of defense deals in India in the past. From Jawaharlal Nehru to Rajiv Gandhi, from the NDA government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee to the UPA government of Manmohan Singh, all have witnessed tainted defense deals. Since independence, India has seen over half a dozen high-profile defense scandals. The first one was the Jeep scandal of 1948. It involved the import of 200 Jeeps. These were worth around $100,000. Or 80 lakh rupees, according to today's conversion rate. But only 155 Jeeps were delivered. V.K. Krishna Menon was India's High Commissioner to the UK then, and he was named. But the case did not go anywhere. It was closed in 1955. Menon later went on to become India's defense minister. This was India's first defense scandal. The most high-profile one was the Bofors case. In 1986, India signed a $1.4 billion deal for the guns. 3 years later, Rajiv Gandhi lost an election over it. Gandhi and his ministers were accused of receiving kickbacks. But again, the charges did not go anywhere. After that, there was a flurry of scandals. The Kargil coffin case in 1999, the Barak missile case in 2001, the Augusta-Westland chopper deal in 2010. In all these cases, there were serious accusations of graft, but they did not lead to any serious convictions. The casualty was always India's defense forces. So after a point, political leaders began going slow. The armed forces suffered even more. But this year has been remarkable in terms of the scope of defense upgrades. In 7 months, New Delhi has cleared multiple deals. Earlier this year, India okayed the purchase of a new air defense missile system. It is called the Akash. The Indian Army will use it. India is buying 2 regiments of this system. An Indian company called Bharat Dynamics Limited will build it. India is also buying 11 offshore patrol vessels, 6 missile vessels, and 13 fire control systems for the Navy. The government is spending a total of $4.4 billion for all of this. Last month, when Prime Minister Modi was in the US, more deals were signed, a fighter jet engine deal worth over $1 billion, and this agreement includes a technology transfer. India is also buying military drones. The order is for 31 MQ-9B Sea Guardian drones. They're worth $3 billion. So there are upgrades across the board. All three defense services are getting bigger and more lethal weapons. And this is the need of the hour. China's build-up on the border remains a concern. 38 months and counting. India needs better weapons to secure its front lines, and India is getting them. It's day 2 of the NATO Summit in Lithuania. Let me show you a picture that sums up the takeaways so far. Look at this. It was clicked during the family photo after the roundtable. Look at President Zelensky. He's standing all alone. The NATO leaders are talking and having a good laugh. The Ukrainian leader is all alone, at war, and at the mercy of the West. This should be a reality check for Ukraine. They were led on and into a war, only to be left out of NATO. Today will be another day of frustration for them. Ukraine wants to be a member, and it wants it now, but NATO says you're not ready. And this is how it played out. First came the roundtable. NATO leaders arrived, clicked pictures, and got down to business. Their agenda had 3 things: Ukraine, Russia, and China. Then there were multiple bilaterals. Turkey's Erdogan met Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak. France's Macron met leaders from Australia and New Zealand. It was like a diplomatic roulette. In the end came the joint statement, and with it, Ukraine's hopes were dashed. Let me quote what it says. We will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met. And what are these conditions? The statement doesn't say, but NATO leaders have raised multiple issues, like ending the war, reforming government agencies, cracking down on corruption. These are the conditions. NATO says, do all of this and you can be a member. But this is a setback for Ukraine. A membership after 10 years doesn't help. Neither do vague commitments. Kiev wants clarity and intent from NATO, maybe a timetable on how long membership will take. Instead, this is what they got.
There is a full-fledged war. And therefore, I think all allies agree that when a war is going on, that's not the time for making Ukraine a full member of the alliance.
So how is Zelensky taking it? As you would expect, he probably knew what was coming. Before landing in Lithuania, he had called NATO's position absurd and weak. But he hasn't given up. Earlier today, he arrived at the summit venue for day 2 of the talks. He was asked about his expectations, and this is what he said.
I think the invitation to NATO, and we want to be on the same page with everybody, with all the understanding. And for today, what we hear and understand, that we'll have this invitation when security measures will allow. Yes.
I know it sounds like a broken record, but it also shows you how desperate Ukraine is. Their counter-offensive is not going to plan. It's too slow and too costly. Plus, Russia is striking back hard. On Tuesday, they hit 3 Ukrainian cities with airstrikes: Kiev, Odessa, and Kherson. So Zelensky has boxed himself into a corner. His entire strategy is based on Western and NATO support, their weapons, their political backing, their money. If NATO is half-hearted, Zelensky is in trouble. And Russia knows this. Their leaders are building more pressure on NATO. Look at what their former president, Dmitry Medvedev, said. I'm quoting again. The completely crazy West could not come up with anything else. In fact, it's a dead end. World War III is getting closer. This is a former Russian president and a Putin confidant. Their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has also given a statement. He says the war will end when NATO stops using Ukraine to defeat Russia. Now, both these men are close to Putin. Their statements sum up the Russian mentality. A, they're not backing down. And B, if the West doesn't stop supporting Ukraine, things could get out of hand. The fighting could spill over. More countries could get dragged in. And as Medvedev said, there could be World War III. This sort of language is meant to trigger. You hear World War III, you shudder. And that's exactly what Russia is trying to do. The question is, how will NATO respond to all of this? Well, they're not giving the membership yet, but they are giving weapons. Germany, France and the US have announced more weapons. The G7 nations are also considering a long-term security package. What does that mean? Something similar to what Israel has. They get military aid worth $3.8 billion every year, but no collective defense. The G7 could offer something similar to Ukraine, I guess anything but NATO membership. While the summit focused on today's war, it also discussed future ones. I'm talking about the showdown with China. The NATO statement mentions China 16 times. 16 times in one statement. Listen to this. The People's Republic of China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security and values. NATO is seriously looking at the Indo-Pacific. 4 countries from the region attended the summit: Australia, New Zealand, South Korea and Japan. Naturally, China was not happy. It has opposed the invitation to these countries. It has also promised a quote-unquote resolute response if NATO moves in this direction. China's state media is doing the heavy lifting. The editorials are fuming at NATO, the usual stuff about Cold War mentality. So looking back, what do we make of this NATO summit? Until last year, this alliance was fading into obscurity. French President Macron had even called it brain dead. But now it's alive. Alive, kicking and expanding. 2 new members have joined the alliance in the last few months. It has also set its eyes on the Indo-Pacific. None of this was supposed to happen. The Ukraine war was set to be about a country's sovereignty and its right to choose, about powerful countries bullying their neighbors. But look what it has become now. The West has used the war to fuel its military complex, to add new members to NATO, to revive an irrelevant alliance. Meanwhile, Ukraine stands alone and desperate. I know this war has produced many defining photographs, but this one of Zelensky will haunt Ukrainians the most. Speaking of questions, Pakistan's Prime Minister is getting a lot of them, and not friendly ones either. Pakistanis are trolling and grilling Shehbaz Sharif, their Prime Minister. Why? Because of an announcement that he made on social media. Take a look at this. Sharif said Saudi Arabia had deposited money in the State Bank of Pakistan, which is their central bank. And how much money? Around $2 billion. Shehbaz Sharif said this deposit will boost Pakistan's foreign reserves. He also thanked the Saudi Crown Prince for it, Mohammed bin Salman. But look at the comments below. Don't speak on behalf of Pakistanis. We abhor this government and the situation it has put us in. Here's another comment. And I'm quoting again, this will end up in an offshore account. You will eat all this money like before. They're paying for your extraordinary lifestyle. What explains this hatred? You would think getting $2 billion is a big deal, especially for Pakistan. Their forex reserves were down to $3.9 billion in June, which is $179 million less than the month before. So why are Pakistanis hating on Shehbaz Sharif? 2 reasons for that. 1, he is deeply unpopular as Prime Minister. Without the army, he has no power. Just look at the same tweet we showed you. Towards the end, he's thanked the Pakistan Army Chief, General Asim Munir. Can you imagine this in any other country? The Prime Minister is thanking the Army Chief for assistance given by another country. So that's one reason why he's not liked. And the second reason is this. You don't get credit for fixing your own mess. Shehbaz Sharif is not part of the solution. He and his party have been part of the problem. And the people of Pakistan know this. Hence all the trolling. The same thing happened last month. Shehbaz Sharif was in Paris for global financial talks. It was raining heavily that day, so a local official went up to him with an umbrella. Guess what he did? He took the umbrella and walked away. The poor official was left drenched in the rain. The Prime Minister was trolled then too. He was called a national embarrassment and Pakistan's Mr. Bean. So what can he do to fix it? Well, he's had some success in the last 2 weeks. The IMF staffers have approved a bailout for Pakistan, a package worth $3 billion. The next step is approval from the IMF board, the International Monetary Fund. A meeting is scheduled for today. If all goes well, the money will soon be released. In fact, that bailout, the IMF bailout, is the reason why Saudi Arabia gave Pakistan the money it did. Riyadh had promised this deposit in April, but they were waiting for the IMF to clear the bailout. Either way, the money is in. Both these developments have improved Pakistan's economic outlook. Ratings agency Fitch has upgraded them. Their default rating was CCC minus. Now it's just CCC. They've removed the minus. Their finance minister has called it, quote unquote, another positive news. I guess there's only one direction to go, from rock bottom. Now, to be clear, CCC is not much of an improvement. It still means substantial credit risk. That's what Pakistan is, substantial credit risk. So Pakistan is not out of the woods yet, far from it. Their inflation is almost 38%. It is now the highest in Asia, even more than Sri Lanka. Their fiscal deficit is also widening, meaning they're spending a lot, but they're not earning very much. Fiscal deficit could reach 7.6% of the GDP by 2024. The ideal level is around 5%. All of this explains why Pakistanis are not happy with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. I know they love cricket. So here's a cricket analogy. Pakistan need 20 runs to win from the last ball. So victory is impossible. Shehbaz Sharif is the last man batting. He's hit a 6 off the last ball and now he's celebrating. But the fans can see the scoreboard. 6 or not, they have lost the match. Pakistan's economic recovery could take years, if not decades. So a Fitch upgrade is not much to celebrate. You know what is? Free and fair elections. But then we may be expecting too much. This year is supposed to be election year in Pakistan. The polls should have been announced by now. But so far, there is no news. The Pakistan People's Party, the PPP, has suggested that Parliament be dissolved on the 8th of August. Now, the PPP is part of Shehbaz Sharif's coalition. But the Prime Minister himself has not said a thing. Perhaps he is waiting for the army. Either way, this election will be a crucial moment for Pakistan, not just for their politics, but also their economy, because the next government will inherit a mess. High inflation, low reserves, and a divided society. So internet trolling is the least of Shehbaz Sharif's problems. And we have more news from India. The Finance Ministry has announced a big decision. Online gaming will now be taxed in India. How much? 28%. As decided by the GST Council. This is a federal body. It decides indirect taxes in India. And I know there will be two sets of reactions to this news. One, who cares? It's just games anyway. And two, this will kill India's gaming industry. Now, if you belong to the first group, this story is for you. Because online gaming is huge. The industry here in India is worth around $2.8 billion. By 2025, it will be worth $5 billion. The global industry is valued at $196 billion. My point is quite simple. There is big money involved. And let me explain how this works. If you go on the internet, you will find hundreds of online games. Some of them are really popular. You may have heard of games like Fortnite or Minecraft. Here in India, betting games are also quite big. Games like Dream 11 or MPL. You don't bet on who wins or who loses because that would be illegal. Instead, you create a virtual team of players before the match. If those players do well in the actual match, you win. To enter these games, you pay upfront, sort of like an entry fee at your local gaming arcade. If you win, you can get a lot of money. Take Dream 11, for instance. You can enter the game by paying just 8 rupees. But guess what the total prize pool is? 12 lakh rupees. First prize winners can get up to 4 lakh rupees. Imagine that. You pay 8 rupees, you get 4 lakhs. This should tell you why online gaming is so popular. Now let me tell you what the tax means. The GST, as we said, is an indirect tax. Technically, it is levied on the producer or seller. In this case, the gaming companies. But in practice, this tax burden, like most tax burden, is shifted to us, the consumer. So here's what's happening. Until now, the tax on gaming was negligible. If you spend $100, you pay, say, $1.8 in GST. Now you must pay $28 in tax. What does that mean? It means that your prize pool is now a lot smaller, and smaller prize pool equals less participation. So gaming companies are not happy. They say the new tax will kill the industry completely. Now here's something else that you should know. Online gaming does not have borders. There are big companies in the US and China. And they don't have to pay 28% tax. In fact, they dominate this market, the gaming market. American companies make up 23% of this market, Chinese companies 25%. So experts say Indian gamers will change loyalties. Instead of Indian games, they will switch to American and Chinese games. Then what happens to the Indian industry? Business leaders say it could perish. The finance minister has pushed back against this suggestion. She says the idea is not to kill any industry. Listen to this.
इंडस्ट्री को खत्म करना ऐसे कोई कुछ हमारे एजेंडा में नहीं है. कैसीनो को प्रमोट करने के लिए, क्योंकि वो टूरिज्म का बहुत अहम मुद्दा है एक आध स्टेट्स के लिए, उसमें टैक्स फूड प्रोडक्ट्स से भी कम होना चाहिए क्या?
The government's argument is quite simple. You can't tax online games like rice or wheat. One is essential, the other is not. So the government says 28% tax was necessary. But what about other countries? How do they tax online games? In the US, the rate depends on which state you're in. The average is about 10%. In the UK, it depends on how much you make. Their rate is between 15 and 50%. And what about China? Well, Beijing offers tax breaks to gaming companies, meaning some of them have to pay no taxes. Some state media agencies have called for taxes to be levied, but so far Beijing has refused. So governments in the West do tax online games. Sometimes the rate is as high as 50%, 50. Then why is India's decision so controversial? Well, a couple of reasons for that. One, India's gaming industry is only finding its feet. We are competing with well-established American and Chinese rivals. And two, there is already tax on winning from online games, a 30% tax. It is deducted at source. So put together, the average gamer is going to have to pay a lot. The question is, could there have been a middle ground? Certainly 1.8% tax was not viable, but is 28% too high? The government says it was a necessary move. We'll have to wait and see how it affects Indian games. Most of them are in fact betting games based on cricket, and it's not something the West or China has traditionally dealt with. So who knows? Maybe there is still hope. The Cricket World Cup will begin soon in India. Maybe that will answer some of the questions. Now for another story coming out of India. One more cheetah that was brought to the country has died. This makes it the 7th cheetah death in India in the last few months. It's a fresh setback for the government. Last year, India began an ambitious program to reintroduce cheetahs in the wild. And the key word is that, reintroduce. Cheetahs once roamed this country, but in 1952, they were declared extinct. Now, India wants to bring them back. The big cats from Africa have been flown in the hope that they will adapt to the Indian environment. But some of the cheetahs are dying. Our next report tells you why.
Wildlife experts and conservationists have their eyes turned to a national park in India. Why, you ask? Because another cheetah there has died. Tejas, a 4-year-old cheetah from South Africa, has succumbed to a severe neck injury. It's believed that he got injured during a fight with another cheetah. But a thorough investigation is underway to get the details. Now, those of you who don't know the significance may wonder, why is this news blowing up so much? Well, you see, last September, amid great fanfare, cheetahs returned to India. 8 cheetahs were brought in from Namibia. They made their way to Kuno National Park in the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. It was a landmark moment for multiple reasons. The first was, of course, the return of cheetahs to India after 7 decades. Last September, they began their grand plan, Project Cheetah. And 8 of the big cats made their way to Indian soil. The plan was momentous for another reason too. It was the first transcontinental reintroduction and conservation effort. The cheetahs India received were from Africa. Another batch of 12 came in from South Africa this February. That brought the total number of adult African cheetahs to 20. It's only 16 now after the death of Tejas yesterday. Now, as you may remember, African animals are different from their Indian cousins. Like the African elephants and lions, cheetahs too have these differences. So it was always going to be a gamble bringing them to India. And that's what it has proved to be. As we said, Tejas is the 4th adult to die since it arrived in India. Overall, it's the 7th casualty. 3 or 4 cubs born to one of the cheetahs also didn't make it. Now, as tragic as all of this is, officials claim it was expected. They have reportedly stated that they expect only a 50% survival rate in the first year. And the deaths do seem natural. One cheetah died due to an infection it picked up in Namibia. Another due to a heart problem. A third died after getting severely injured during mating. And Tejas was also killed by an injury from another cheetah. As for the 3 cubs, they reportedly died due to dehydration. Officials say that the survival rate for cubs in the wild is only about 5% anyway. So does this mean India shoulders no blame? Not quite. Experts have issued a tide of criticism at the program. First, they say that while deaths are common in the wild, the cheetahs in India were in a controlled environment. Better monitoring could have saved the lives of Tejas and the other cheetah that died due to injuries. Now to the cubs. Cubs in controlled environments like conservation facilities have a survival rate of over 70%. The Kuno National Park is also a protected facility. So, more should have been done to save the cubs. Then there's the issue of environment. It was always going to be difficult to have African cheetahs adapt to India. But experts say India could do more to accommodate them. For example, the space in Kuno National Park is limited. In the wild, cheetahs usually roam far greater stretches of land. This prevents conflicts with other cheetahs as well. Kuno Park is reportedly not big enough to prevent territorial conflicts. And when it comes to rare animals like the cheetah, officials cannot expect them to adhere to Indian standards of space. The cheetahs should not be forced to adjust and make room. Some say the cheetahs should be moved to other parks or conservation sites as well. But only one other site is reportedly ready to host them, the Mukundra Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan. But there are no signs yet that the cheetahs will be shifted there. The focus should be on prioritizing the lives of the remaining cheetahs. Even if the conservationists predicted a 50% death rate, we should do our best to beat that. It's hard to see cheetahs returning to India if they aren't made welcome here.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Army, Navy and Air Force contingent held a practice session in France ahead of the Bastille Day parade. They marched to the tune of the song, Sare Jahan Se Achha Hindustan Hamara. It translates to, better than the entire world is our India. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Australian counterpart Anthony Albanese joked about a controversial moment in the Ashes cricket series. In Bulgaria, a dash cam captured the moment when a meteor fell on the earth. It lit up the night sky. And finally, we're taking you back in history. This one is especially for the boomers. On this day in 1962, rock band The Rolling Stones performed for the first time ever in London. At that time, the band only had 5 members. The 6th member was hired later that year. Over the next 5 decades, this band held over 2,000 concerts around the world. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
It's going to be really provocative.
I'm sorry I didn't bring my sandpaper with me.
There's a crease.
We'll see.